All right, we have a very special guest on the show today who just recently made a major announcement. Cleveland Mayor Frank Jackson. Welcome back to the show. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing well, and thanks for having me back.
All right, so you made the announcement that you've decided not to seek re-election.
Right.
Talk a little bit about that. When did you make that decision, and why now? Why did you think now was the right time to pass the baton?
Well, I can't give you exactly on all that. I know it's just time for me to move on. And the timing of when I announced it is really a factor of a couple of things. Remember, I told you before that if I said I was running, then everything becomes political.
Mm-hmm.
If I said not running, then treat me like a lame duck. And so I really wanted to get a lot of things accomplished before I even made a decision what I would do. But as it got closer to the filing deadline, as I think mid-June, and people were calling me who were my supporters, financial supporters and political supporters, saying that people were calling them and they were telling the people that they were waiting on me to decide what I was going to do, so they couldn't tell those people whether or not they were going to support them politically or financially. So it just got to a point that, in fairness to my supporters and also to the people who are in the race, that I just needed to make the announcement since the filing deadline is just a few weeks away.
Mm-hmm. So are you concerned about the whole lame duck thing, or do you think that you'll still be able to get the things done that you need to?
Well, I'm always concerned about whether or not the issues that are important to me and the people of the city of Cleveland that I represent, which is pretty much everybody, whether or not our concerns would be addressed. So that's why I did the things that I did leading up to this. Mm-hmm. And we do have some things on the table that without the mayor's approval or the mayor's taking some action on, it won't get done. So I think I still have a little leverage left.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We're talking with Cleveland Mayor Frank Jackson. And Robin, I know you have a question about the mayor's pending retirement. Go ahead, Robin.
Yes. So, Mr. Mayor, what do you plan on doing in retirement?
I've often said to people that what I look forward to whenever I retired was to do nothing. Just to have the ability to do nothing and to do something because you want to do it, to me is a luxury. And I know that in January 1st of 2022, I'll be in that position. And so I'll do nothing. And I have not really looked at what I will do post-retirement. I haven't really looked at it. I haven't even considered it, what I do. I just know that right now I'm still mayor. I'll be that till I turn off the lights in the last minute of my term. And then from that point, I'll be in a position where I don't have to do anything. Mm-hmm. And then it'll flow from there.
Absolutely. We're talking with Cleveland Mayor Frank Jackson. And let's talk, obviously you've been mayor for 16 years. You've been in public service longer than that. What, in your view, do you believe is your biggest accomplishment in your years of public service?
Well, I can't really answer that, and for a couple of reasons. One is that I'm not finished. Mm-hmm. I still have some months to go here. And then secondly, that's kind of dependent on a lot of stuff. I can talk about education and our education reform. I can talk about economic development and our community benefits package and the Fannie Lewis law before the state nixed it. We could talk about our efforts to address predatory lending before the financial crisis. And so there's, and even today, the recovery that we did from the foreclosure crisis, predatory lending, and the Great Recession. We're in a pandemic now, and we're working our way through that. And now we have some monies coming from the federal government. We had the program to help us have a more robust future. So it's kind of hard to pinpoint one thing. Even if we're talking about young people in our bringing together trauma coaches in our rec centers to help deal with young people who've been traumatized by the violence on the street, whether they participated in it, were victims of it, or witnesses of it, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to pinpoint one thing. And that's what I like for people to understand, that being mayor, I don't know how it was in the past, but being in a position like this, the measurements are completely different than what they would probably be in the past, because you can say this person accomplished this or this person accomplished that. There are so many balls in the air now and so much need out there, and so much chaos and confusion based on the breaking down of the established norms of the past, that it's just so much. So right. There's no one or two or even three things. Mm-hmm. It's work.
Right.
It's work. You just have to put the work in.
Mm-hmm. There was one, I watched your speech the other day, making this announcement, and there were several parts of it that stood out to me, but one in particular was when you talked about being haunted by the images of the things that, our community, a lot of people, but our community in particular have been through. And I know the older I get, the more that you really start to learn about and see, what the community has been through. And, when I talk to, people who are my parents' age or my grandparents' age, and they talk about a community that is unrecognizable to me, it's something that I never saw the way that they talk about it. So right. Talk a little bit more about that, about your experiences, what it was like seeing the community go through that. Just talk a little bit more about that whole concept of those images.
Let me start off by saying that, I've lived in Central for over 60 years of my life. I've lived in Central. And I can remember Central being, when we were segregated, being the place where Black people lived predominantly. There were pockets in other parts of the city, but basically the who's who of the Black community came out of Central. And I can remember there were houses on every vacant lot. Public housing was a place where families were, and people didn't lock their doors. I remember when there were businesses all up and down Central, what we call Scoville then, they call it Community College now. On 55th, we had hotels and movie theaters and nightclubs. And I remember the restaurants, and then you had storefronts that had offices above them where there were doctors and lawyers and dentists, and you could just walk to whatever it is that you needed, and where the children of welfare parents and the children of business people knew each other because everybody went to the same school, because we all lived in the same community because we were segregated. And then I remember the riots and going through the riots and the civil rights movement and listening to everyone from H. Rap Brown and Stokely Carmichael to Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and a number of other unknown people who were part of the movement then on a local scale, and how in the Black Panther Party and the Black Nationalists. I was a young teenage, and even though I was in the midst of all this, I didn't participate in it because I was a kid, and I didn't participate, but I was in the midst of it. And then I remember going to the Army and Vietnam, coming back, and the kids that I grew up with, or kids that were younger than me and who were playing marbles when I left, were now might have been selling pills or doing other kind of things that was not things that was recognizable to me. It's like a culture shock, and I can remember that because of urban renewal policy coming out of the federal government, that basically tore down properties in places like Central as people began to move out because of what they called fair housing back then into neighborhoods that were predominantly white, and those people fled to the suburbs, and they left behind these vacant houses, and they were vandalized and torn down. All these empty lots got created, and then on the commercial strips, there was redlining. So even if you had a good business, you couldn't borrow money from a financial institution because of this redlining to sustain your business. Or if you owned a home and you had a job and good credit, you still couldn't borrow money because it was redlined. And that policy, how it took investments and dollars out of the community, and then those doctors and lawyers and dentists and all them moved to suburban office buildings and all that kind of stuff. And as a result of that, you had the poorest of the poor left behind in public housing, and then families like mine living in single-family homes dotted all over in these vacant, among all this vacant lot. And so you had the children of, as time went on, the children of the people who left, particularly the professional and business people or the educated people who left, their children and the children of the poor no longer knew each other. So one didn't trust the other one, and the other one scared of the other one. And so then we went through a process of attempting to rebuild the community. And as a result of that civil rights movement and all of that, we had the introduction of drugs. And then 80s, 90s came around, crack cocaine, and effects of that on families, particularly young women and children, and abuse and all that. And then we can just progress on up to now. So they tell you that it's unrecognizable because when you describe a community that is solid with businesses, with professional people living together regardless of their economic or social status, whether you have a culture that really governs behavior and what is right and wrong and all this other, and you had gentlemen gangsters who were some of whom were elected officials, but they controlled the numbers game or the after hours joints or the gambling joints, and people raised their family off running numbers and all this other kind of stuff. It's a whole different world. It's a different world. And young people today, they just know what they know. Mm-hmm. And since they're not fans of history or even a short-term history of their own culture, all they know is the streets and what the streets have told them. And that's all they know. So it's unrecognizable for them. And I would tell you, older people, this stuff that's going on now is like it's a different world to them. So it works on both ends. So I hope that kind of encapsulates why people are in these states of mind. But the biggest thing and the greatest opportunity we have is that we're very palatable, in a sense that because there was so much effort to undermine the African American and the black culture as a result of black people attempting to gain power and wealth in the overall general society. And the reaction to that was the same reaction they had to President Obama serving 2 terms. You had this white backlash, right? Where you had this same kind of approach that resulted in policy that undermined that culture, undermined the community, that introduced drugs and all the things that resulted from that in crime and murder and prostitution and all that. You see, all of these things have materialized, and now what we have is the ability to rebuild. Mm-hmm. But in order to do that, we have to address these things that I say haunt me. Mm-hmm. And because that is the effects of this history I just laid out to you, is the things that haunt me that I mentioned are the effects of the things of this history and institutionalized inequities, disparities, and racism that still persist in our society. And that core thing of trying to address that is where you will see the pushback constantly. And it's a constant struggle. It's a constant work in that regard. And many times we've gone to sleep when we become successful in believing because we are successful that the work is over with, or we become sedated by becoming alcoholics or drug addicts, mm-hmm. or we get into an illusion by living in a fantasy world of that is produced through entertainment and all this other stuff.
We're talking with Cleveland Mayor Frank Jackson, and I'm old enough to remember the tail end of the crack epidemic. I grew up in the inner city. It was no joke.
It was no joke.
Yeah,
no joke.
Yeah, it was no joke.
It was the meanest drug I've ever seen.
Yes, absolutely.
I tried to take young girls out of the church.
Yeah.
And turn them into what we call strawberries, prostitutes.
Mm-hmm. It was vicious.
One hit.
Yeah, it was absolutely vicious. So you talked about us having the opportunity to rebuild. What can we do to rebuild? Because in a lot of ways, a lot of the things that we see today are still vestiges of a time like that.
That's right. Well, what it comes down to is this. What the general overall society has labeled as people who are undesirable, mm-hmm. and have done things that have given them bad paperwork, and our society and our system making it so difficult for them just to survive or get back on their feet or become productive members of society. And every once in a while, a few will make it through, but as a general rule, they're stymied, they're oppressed. When you look at that is our future, though. Mm-hmm. When I've been to penitentiaries to talk to people in the penitentiary and look at these big young healthy dudes who, and I'm talking about ones who have beginning to have their mind change and see the world in a different way. I ain't talking about the ones who just want to continue that life. They just need to stay locked up. But I'm talking about the ones who actually see things differently. The problem is they still got a whole bunch of time left to do. And if you don't, and when they do come out, they can't drive a car because their license is suspended. If they had children, they got all this child support stuff that means they can't even get a license unless they deal with that. They're prohibited from holding jobs because of a criminal record. They can't even get housing, decent housing, because they have a criminal record. So everything is stacked against them in terms of being able to come out and then to be reproductive. So part of what I do is to allow for people who have criminal records, felonies, to become employees of the city of Cleveland. The other thing that we, of course, you do appropriate. You don't, you can't have an embezzler in the finance department, of
right.
course. But what happens is, what I've learned is, because of the yoke that has been put on people, particularly young black men and women, they have a high sense of anxiety that's built around bitterness, hatefulness, resentment, and all that, which I don't believe is wrong, because if you're getting kicked around, there's something wrong with you if you ain't got some level of bitterness in regards to that, right? Mm-hmm. But what happens is there's a release of that in a way that is self-destructive to self, community, and family. But if that can be channeled, because it's it's real powerful energy, like a tight spring. If you release it, it explodes and destroys stuff. Or you can channel it in a way that is slowly released in a focused way, and that gives our young men and women a competitive edge over anyone else in society. But that means there has to be an adoption by people of a reality that is in their self-interest, and identification of where their energy should be focused rather than being self-destructive. Mm-hmm. And once you do that, then what you find is that you can find no better person in terms, if you have a corporation, if you want a competitive edge, just bring one of them in, because they're very competitive. They have the ability to do things, and they're very aggressive and stuff like that. But they're doing it in a productive way as opposed to a destructive way.
Right.
If you're looking at and if you're looking at putting these young dudes in check out on the street, you let some of these older dudes come out, and rather than promoting gangster life, come out and sit them down. And if they don't want to sit down, force the issue. They'll sit down. Uh-huh. You see? But we don't have that. So it gives us an opportunity to redefine. But in order to make that possible, we have to take away those barriers for people who are sincere and want to do right. We have to take away those distractions from people, and we have to give them the opportunity to access jobs, to access wealth and be a business person, to access the ability to be self-determined and creative in what they do. And this system is not allowing that, because they believe that to be a danger to it.
Mm-hmm. We're talking with Cleveland Mayor Frank Jackson, who recently announced his pending retirement. Your term, when is the end of your term? When's the last day?
Midnight on the last, January what? 3rd. January 3rd of 2022.
Okay. Obviously, we live in such a polarized world, a polarized society right now, and in so many different ways. But one way is the pressure that is put on people in leadership, people in positions of power and influence, where, they try to make this binary choice where you're either with the people or you're with the business community. You have been one of the few politicians who've been able to have respect and credibility on both sides. Why has that been the case? What have you done to be able to have respect and influence in both the business community and with the people?
Well, because I don't buy into the conversation of ideologies, meaning that I fully recognize that as a society, our only ability to function in a positive way is to have prosperity. The question becomes who participates in that prosperity and who gains wealth as a result of it, and who has the power to set the policies associated with who gets and who doesn't get. That's the real issue. And so I'm not caught up in this whole thing around these purists, because to me, a purist on the left is no different than a purist on the right. They're both intolerant of anybody who has a different point of view. And so they just automatically reject you. Well, we don't have that luxury as Black people, particularly the disadvantaged portion of Black people, particularly, even though all of us are, there's still some who bear most of that burden. And so we don't have that luxury. We need to pick and choose what works for us, and what works for us to be able to improve our economic condition, our social condition. And that may be a Republican point of view, a Democratic point of view, a left progressive point of view, or maybe a conservative point of view, and whatever it may be. So I'm not caught up in all them ideologies and stuff, and just those artificial lines of distinction, and which tells me I gotta pick one side or the other, or if I'm doing this to help people, then I must be this, or if I'm trying to get the business community to open up for jobs and careers for young Black people, and to create procurement opportunities for Black businesses, then something must be wrong with me. I'm over there with them. When no, I'm not over with them. I'm always in the same spot. I'm for the people I represent, and I'm trying to get them to have access to wealth, access to power, and dealing with the obstacles and the impediments of institutionalized inequity, disparities, and racism. Now, let me point out something to you. And I don't tell people this, but I'm going to tell you in a public sense. What we're dealing with is a world that's in some kind of schizophrenic condition. It's got multiple personalities, and they're battling each other as in terms of political systems, in terms of economic systems, and in terms of social systems. They're in constant battle. And what we have is this schizophrenic world that is in this constant turmoil of which personality or which philosophical point of view is going to prevail. And what we make the mistake of doing is choosing sides. Because ain't none of them going in our interest. Why are we picking side? Which side of craziness we gonna support? And so we should be looking at our agenda. And what is that agenda? And how do we use this system to access wealth and power for the benefit of us. Now, let me give you, so that people, you say people won't recognize, let me give you an example where I come from. I can remember, again, when we were segregated. I'm a kid, teenager, living in Central, and they were, like I say, these gentlemen gangsters. They ran the numbers and after-hour joints and the gambling joints, and there were these black businessmen, most of whom were Republicans, and then there were these other black men, who were, some of them were businessmen, but they had influence in terms of whether they were clergy or professional people, and many of them were Democrats. But they were business people too. Mm-hmm. So it didn't matter who became mayor, because a black man then wasn't going to be mayor. Carl Stokes broke that, but before then he wasn't going to be mayor. So no matter who got to be mayor, which white person became mayor, and a woman couldn't be, so it was all white men, whether they were Democrat or Republican, there was always a black man who they would go to talk about what was in the interest of the black community. Mm-hmm. Whether it was a Democratic mayor or black mayor, or Republican mayor. And what the black Democrats did and the black Republicans did, they got together and talked about what was in the interest of black people. Mm-hmm. And even though they were Democrats and one was a Republican, they talked what was in the interest of black people. So when the Republicans were in charge and this black Republican was there to give advice, he gave advice as to the interest of black people. When the Democrat was in charge of the city hall, and this black man was associated with this black Democrat, and he asked the black man what can he do, or what was in the interest of black people, the Republican and the Democrat black people had already figured that out. Mm-hmm. So no matter who was in charge, we got a piece of the pie. We got some of the action. And then we formed our own thing. We formed our own thing. Do you see that now?
Far from it.
What they're making us do is choose. Are you a progressive and Democrat? And if you're a black man, you're Republican, you're something wrong with you. Or the black Republican says, well, if you're a progressive, you're talking about that kind of stuff, and I don't believe in that, because they bought into the philosophy and the agenda of craziness. Mm-hmm. They're following something that is not in the interest of black people. So we are caught up in adopting the philosophy and the agenda of one crazy thing, one crazy one crazy part of this personality, as opposed to another crazy part of this personality. Neither one of them got our interest at all.
Mm-hmm. Can we ever get back to the time that you were talking about?
Oh yeah. We if I ever thought that it was hopeless, I can imagine and just imagine, even I try to imagine. What is the hopes of a slave? Mm. Who all they knew from birth to death was slavery, and how would they have hope for anything other than that? How would they envision anything other than that? That's all they knew. But there was hope, wasn't there? Mm-hmm. If it were not for the hope, if it were not for faith, right? If it were not for those things that were intangible, that kept black people moving, knowing one day, if we lose hope, if we lose faith, then we're finished. And I believe that part of the agenda of this a system that is built its wealth and power off the subjugation of people, particularly black people, and that has as its core of inequity, disparity, and racism as a source of its wealth and power. I believe that they are deliberately going about trying to eliminate that hope and creating chaos and confusion and a lack of full understanding of who we are and what our purpose is in life. Mm-hmm. But in doing that, I believe also that they're creating Frankenstein's monster. And as you know, Frankenstein's monster rose up to destroy his creator. Mm-hmm. And so they believe that if they continue to sedate us with drugs and alcohol, continue to impress upon us that the education don't mean nothing, so that we remain ignorant. If they continue to let us know that and say to us that we're going to take care of you, and that you don't have to think for yourself, that we'll provide you with decisions and you can just follow through on those things. You don't have to think for yourself, and we'll even provide you with some better social welfare as a result of it. So you ain't got to worry about being an entrepreneur and creating wealth. And we'll take care of you. They're creating, and then on top of that, when you go through that crack cocaine now, and we're living with the grandchildren of crack cocaine. Yeah. That is Frankenstein's monster, because it has become ruthless. It has become, it can do mayhem without remorse, and it's developed a street culture without mercy. Now that's a dangerous proposition if focused in a political way. You best focused in a political way and pointed towards a particular somebody or something, whoever they're pointed to, they got serious issues. They got serious problems coming.
Right.
So that's the dangerous thing, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So that's my point of view. That's the way I see it.
We're talking with Cleveland Mayor Frank Jackson, and as we get ready to wind down here, just to recap once again, for those of you who missed it, the mayor announced that he's not running for re-election. What do you want your legacy to be? How do you want to be remembered?
I can't tell you that, because that's like an obituary. And I ain't finished yet. I still got the remainder of this term. And to be honest with you, Davio, Mr. Morrow, we just need to put work in. Mm-hmm. There's so much to do, but there's so few to do it. Mm-hmm. We just need to put work in. And being concerned about how we should be remembered, I think is a luxury. Mm. Because I will tell you, in my life experience, there are people who put in much harder work than me and have sacrificed and suffered far greater than I have, and in many cases lost their lives. And they have no legacy because nobody knows the difference, and they don't even know they existed. Uh-huh. But I remember them, and those who I've run into. And so I'm not looking for a legacy. Whatever history says and whatever comes out of this will come out of this, and I'm not concerned about that. All I'm concerned about is what I'm doing while I can do it, and if I'm doing right by who has put the confidence and faith in me. That's all I'm concerned about. Let the legacy be whatever it is. What it be? It could be a lie. It could be a lie. Then I just have to live in history as a lie. As you remember, what did you was on the other call, and he tried to talk to me about will I miss them? You know, I'm not trying to dodge any question or anything, but I have very low tolerance of BS. And you know, and if they write the history because they have the power, then whatever they write, and I'm not going to be so concerned about it that I adjust what I do and what I say to accommodate that, thinking that they're going to have a better opinion of me. I could care less what they think. You know, there are some people whose opinion I value, and if they say something to me, then I'll stop. Because I value their opinion. I value them. And I'll check myself as to what I'm doing and what I'm saying, because somebody has said something to me in regards to it, but it ain't too many in that category. You know, and if a group of people like the people, you know, I've even been criticized by those who I've attempted to help and have, because of miscommunication by traditional ways in which they receive information, has painted me as this and that. You know, I've had people, because of that misrepresentation, approach me or even demonstrate in front of my house. But I have no animosity towards them. I really don't, because I know it was out of their ignorance that they behave the way they behave. And I ain't talking about ignorance in terms of not being intelligent, but they just got the misinformation and they responded to that. So I have no malice towards them. But then there's that other group. I don't care what they talking about. I have no concern whatsoever. But they're the ones who write history.
Right.
And they're the ones who create legacies. You see? And I'm not trying to ingratiate myself to them or to please them in any way. And it's not my purpose or agenda.
There was another question that was mentioned on that call that you just referenced to that I thought was very interesting. Would you ever consider writing a book?
You know what? I'm not in that mode. I mean, I'm not going to say I wouldn't. Perhaps when I retire and my mind settles in after I get to doing nothing, and then I decide, what am I going to do? Maybe that might be something. I don't know. Or maybe I get a scribe, somebody who I can just sit down and run off at the mouth with, and they can scribe it and then put it down. I don't know. But I do know this, that sometimes you have to do things that are more important to others than it is to you. And if that is determined to be something that is and somebody wants to help in that regard, I would consider it. But I'm not, I'm not trying to be someone who would tell everybody what they should or shouldn't be doing. I'm not going to be that bold and arrogant or self-centered. But, to have a conversation around life and my life and decisions I've made and why I've made them, I guess is another story.
Absolutely. I think people would definitely be interested to read something like that. So as we get ready to close here, Robin, I know you have one more question for the mayor.
So, Mr. Mayor, what advice would you give to the next generation of leaders?
Put the work in. Stop assuming because you gotten a degree or you jumped a few hoops that society has said and you persevered that automatically you qualify to run something or be the boss. you got to put work in. And because when you put work in, it teaches you something that them books will not teach you. I remember when I went to college and I got the degrees I got, and that's another story and another segment that we can talk about. But I quickly realized, because I was about 27 years old when I went to taking remedial stuff at Tri-C, I quickly realized that if I believed and practiced the stuff that I read, I would be crazy as hell. and that I would be doing, and if I tried to implement it, then I would be doing serious harm to the people of our community. So but because I needed to read the stuff to get a grade, and I was able to give them back what they needed to give me a passing grade, it didn't mean that I bought into it, and I needed to read the books in order to get the grade. So I read the stuff. I wrote papers on the stuff. I did all that as I got an associate's, bachelor's, master's, and a law degree, right? After having to do remedial work up front. And after graduating from high school and being almost 20 years old when I graduated and being that far behind. So I had some life experience that allowed me to interpret what they were talking about in a way that I believe I could discern and then pick and choose among the different schools of thoughts and concepts and philosophies and theories, what was in the best interest of myself and the people that I was trying to help. So that's what I mean by putting work in. You got to put work in. You got to mature in this stuff. And life is a college, and getting a PhD and a master's or bachelor's or even an associate degree in life will carry you much further than the academic stuff. The academic stuff will give you good paperwork and credentials and give you a resume. But your ability to function in a way that is productive for yourself and for your family and for your community, you will learn that through life. And that means you got to put the work in. You got to go through the fire sometime, and you have to do the heavy lifting. You have to bear the burden. You have to do all those kinds of things. And that's what my recommendation for young people who want to be leaders, that you have to put work in. And because you have good credentials don't mean that you are ready for the game. Quick example, apologize for this, but it's like being a heavyweight fighter, and you're an amateur and you go to the Olympics. It's obvious that you have talent and potential because you wouldn't get on the Olympic team. Mm-hmm. And then you wind up winning the gold medal. And it's obvious that you got potential and talent, or you wouldn't have won the gold medal. But if you think you're going to leave there and go fight the heavyweight champion of the world, you getting your butt kicked. It ain't happening. It ain't going to happen. You can't even look up on that. Mm-hmm. And so what a good manager will do, he'll have you put the work in. He'll match you up in the beginning with people who he know you will be. But these people have skills and strengths where you don't have, and you have weaknesses that he wants to turn into strengths and skills. So he'll match you up with someone so that through that experience of that fight, you actually gain that experience and it strengthens you where you were weak. Mm-hmm. And then it makes your strengths even stronger. And then as you go along, he'll get you greater competition, and that greater competition will strengthen you even more. Then you get to the point where you become a contender. You're ranked as a top contender. Then all bets are off. You just got to, then you on your own then, and if you ain't learned it by then, it's over with. Because if you haven't, you're going to get beat. And if you wind up going through that trial and that tribulation, if you wind up going through that gauntlet and you put that work in, then you can fight for the heavyweight championship of the world, and you have a possible chance at that time. But if you think you leave because you've done well and you have great potential and talent, and that you got the right credentials because you won the gold medal, and you're going to fight the heavyweight champion of the world, you're going to get creamed.
All right, we're talking with Cleveland Mayor Frank Jackson, and as we close on a similar topic, I know that you're not prepared as of right now to endorse a potential successor, but are there any characteristics or qualities that you're looking for in a potential successor?
What Robin is talking about when she asks her question, I think underlining her question is that who would you want to be your leader? Who would you want when the next crisis occur? Who would you have confidence in that would handle that crisis in a way that would we survive and that Black people survive and that we are positioned for recovery and be better off as a result of recovery and going through that crisis. And believe me, a crisis is always looming. Someone who is honest, and I'm not talking about just being honest in terms of the law, not being a crook. I'm talking about being honest in terms of the people. And we'll be honest with the people even when it's not in their political interest, which goes again to the crisis, because if you have a crisis and you panic, you're going to lose. But if you got a crisis and you have somebody who becomes politically scared because of these different factions pushing them to be on one side or the other, and they choose one of these schizophrenic characters to be on the side of, because they want to be politically better off, then you dead. You finished then. Because they just fed you to the wolves. You just got sacrificed. and so, just those two things. And someone who at bottom cares about you. You're not going to always agree with them. And you know what? You know that they will fight for you. Even if they don't win, they gon' be in the fight. And they care about you. They care about your well-being. They care about the well-being of who you care about. And that is not through rhetoric. That's not through conversation. That's by putting the work in and demonstrating through the challenges that they've gone through, who they are and what their character is, because the work has honed them to be who they are. Put the work in.
That's right. Mr. Mayor, I want to say this to you. First of all, thank you, as always, for spending your time with us and being so generous with your time. I also want to thank you for the support and respect that you've shown to Black media. That doesn't happen very often in this city, so I definitely appreciate the respect and the support that you've shown, and just the graciousness of spending your time with us throughout all these interviews that we've done. So thank you, sir.
Well, I appreciate it, and I want to thank you also, because as I said to Sam Silk on the radio earlier today, that he has allowed me, just like you've allowed me, to have access to your listeners who are people who don't necessarily trust the system at large, and they're people who don't really follow the notion of the traditional kind of media, but you've allowed me access to them and a conversation with them that I believe has helped me to be a better mayor as I make decisions going forward, because I mentioned to someone earlier today, I've been through a lot of elections in 31 years. Mm-hmm. And in every election I've been in, I've always had an opponent and I've always had a primary. But I've won every one of them. And I'm not leaving because I'm afraid of losing anything. If I decided to run, my intent would be to win. Mm-hmm. But I will tell you that that the people who you represent and the people who listen to your communication, those are people who I care about. And you've allowed me access to them in a way that I'm not interpreted by someone else as to what someone else. I'm not interpreted by one of them personalities in that schizophrenic world, right? Mm-hmm. And so you've allowed me direct access, and I appreciate that.